if you're if you're ready to talk about the README for this working group, and maybe give a little background if you want, or I can.
Yeah, so we I don't know, October, November, it's been a little bit ago. So we started off with this working group. It was the Digital Identity Attestation Working Group. We had a number of new projects, wanting to come into OpenSSF and discussions that were related to more supply chain more broadly, not just the identity of individuals or artifacts in the supply chain. So rather than creating a new working group, what we decided to do is to expand the scope of the Digital Identity Attestation Working Group and make it supply chain integrity. So we agreed to do that both in this working group, and then we discussed with the OpenSSF TAC, and so we have renamed the working group, and we've started to update the links and the names of the mailing lists and those things. What we haven't done yet is update the README page. And we also need to have some discussion about what did we consider as the overall scope and mission for the working group, given the new focus. So that's what this topic was about, is working on updating the README, which will involve talking, discussions about scope and mission and such. So I would be happy to, we can talk about process for that. I'd be happy to volunteer to, create a draft of a new README page, and then share it with everyone on the mailing list. And then, and then we could discuss next week, once we've got a draft and, and some people commenting on a draft. That's one way to go about it, sharing it on the mailing list. The other way we could do it is I could create a draft and then make it a pull request, and then we could comment on the pull request or comment on issues. So I'm open to whatever people think are the best ways to go about that.
Hey, Kay, this is Michael. Sorry, I'm having problems with networking today, but I think a pull request model would be a little premature because it's not a collaborative editing process. So I think a doc of some kind that we can iterate on would be a great place to do it. Happy to help you early on in the draft as well.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'll, so we'll do that then, unless anyone has concerns. I'll go ahead and create a draft document, and then I'll share that out on the, maybe I'll iterate with a couple of folks, maybe Michael and Kim, or, very briefly first, and then, quickly we'll get it out onto the mailing list and let other people add comments and make suggestions.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions on that? No? Cool. Okay. Next thing on the agenda is we're going to get a demo from the folks at SIFT, or a SIFT demo, folks at Anchor. And I think I saw Alex on the call and said hello. So Alex, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, howdy. Yeah, nice to see y'all. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hi, so yeah, I heard at the last meeting there was a request to get a demo of SIFT, so decided to join. So thanks, Josh, for poking me and letting me know what was going on. So yeah, so without further ado, what is SIFT? SIFT is a
hey Alex, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Who are you and what do you do?
Yes, thank you. The small details in between. Yeah, okay, so my name is Alex Goodman. I work at Encore. I'm the tech lead and one of the core developers on SIFT and Gripe and the tools team here. So we've been working on these tools for the past year and a half, 2 years now. Yeah, and so we've just been kind of barreling forward and adding more and more features as they've also gotten integrated into our core enterprise products as well. So yeah, thanks, Josh. Sometimes I skip ahead, so. So yeah, without further ado, yeah, SIFT. SIFT is a software bill of materials tool for given a container image or a file system, you can generate a SBOM. So we can generate it for the wide variety of formats that are available, such as SPDX and CycloneDX, as well as detect packages across a large set of ecosystems, such as Python packages, Ruby gems, Go binaries in the packages within that we can find within there, et cetera. We have a listing on our README. So I kind of wanted to show what that looks like. So if I have a local image in our Docker daemon, in my Docker daemon here, so we'll pull that image and we'll start cataloging all the packages we could find. And this is just a summary view of what was found. And this particular image was an Alpine package. So we found a lot of APK files, APK packages, as well as some Python files. But we also have, as I was mentioning earlier, the ability to say, hey, I want to get this output and say CycloneDX, a standard SBOM format. So this is CycloneDX version, I believe 2.3, but I have to double check. So, and additionally, we also support SPDX, both the tag value format, which has been around longer than say the JSON format that they also have, which we additionally support. So so the nice thing is we can support all of these formats and but still have like a one core model that represents what is discovered. And that core model is best shown in our JSON output. So if you do -o JSON. And to show you what we find for each individual package, see, I'll actually spit everything out into a file and kind of jump into what that file looks like. Yeah, okay, so this JSON file, we have all of the packages that we discover here, information about the tool and its configuration underneath descriptor, and any files that we're discovering, as well as anything about the source. In this case, we're looking at a particular container image. So if I were to look at specifically the source section, you'll see everything that we were able to parse about this particular container image, specifically all the layers, all the layer tars, and what the digests are, and any metadata that we find that's useful. If we were to jump into say what one of these packages actually looks like artifacts. So I'm going to jump into the artifact section. So I randomly looked at one particular package. So it's a package called keyutils. We have a bunch of normalized metadata up here at the top, including say name, version, the type, where it was found, specifically the path, and also the layer it was found in. So you may find this across multiple layers as the package may even change if someone's manually changing it or you're installing a different version. Any identifiers that is usually pretty useful for say downstream processing, such as vulnerability scanning. And anything specific to the metadata that we found in the packaging ecosystem. So for Alpine, like this is all the raw information that we parse from the Alpine database. So yeah, so popping up for a little bit. So I was showing off specifically running SIFT against say an image, but I also wanted to show, hey, I've got a local directory where I don't necessarily have an image, I just have other stuff in here. And I can run SIFT against this local directory, which happens to have say like, log4j wrapped in a zip, and we can still detect that, like, yeah, we still detect like log4j core. And the same thing if I were to say pass in that specific, archive here to say, hey, yeah, we can definitely unwrap this and see the contents within it. So, so yeah, I guess that is most of what I wanted to show off today. And I want to stop and pause and see if you guys had any questions or comments or curiosities.
Hey, Santiago here. This is pretty cool. I had a couple of questions of what I saw. I wonder if we could go back a little bit to the part where you were showing the CPEs.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Let's see. Cat artifacts 10. Yes.
So this is something that I was very, very curious to know because this CPE is listing key utils and key utils live on a version that's upstream, right? And we know the upstream version is a Red Hat package just by looking at the URL. But we're looking at an Alpine build of that library, right? So how do we reconcile those two things? Actually, I like this because it's also like Perl is right under it, which it's a little bit more precise. In terms of like policing and understanding what this all means, how would you see a policy processing this fact that it's an Alpine build of a Red Hat library of a particular version for a particular architecture, and well, some CVEs won't tell you whether this applies to this Perl or the CPE, right? More than likely, they will tell you it will apply to a CPE rather than a Perl.
Right. So, and actually, that's one of the main reasons for including, say, CPEs in its output. So, and just to be actually really clear, the CPEs in particular, this is synthetic data. This is data that we're generating based off of what we found. It's not actually something that we directly found. The vast majority of software in the world does not include, say, a CPE listing for like a particular package. And so this is us basically taking our best guess off of the metadata we found of what the CPE might be. And the reason why that's really useful and how important is because of essentially the NVD, NVD database, National Vulnerability Database, it's all indexed primarily by CPE. And so if you want to take packages and search against a thing, CPE is going to be your best way to do it, and which is usually against the upstream package and not an OS specific packaging. So that kind of speaks a little to what you're talking about between, say, Alpine's packaging of a thing versus, say, the upstream project itself.
Right. Yeah. This is probably I think it's a broader problem, and you're totally right that if I wanted to do some like checking, say using NVD, then would use like their JSON schema, and that thing lets me query by CVEs. But then I may be even overclaiming, or I may be underclaiming, right? Because we know that there's some CVEs that apply to a build with a particular configuration. So that's kind of why I wanted to highlight this. And yes, you're totally right. I think in that sense, you need to, the best that you can afford right now is to just guess, take this regex and make it to the best of your ability.
There's another reason why you don't see, say, these other fields. We have stars here. The less guessing we do, the better. So we could actually start implementing more, putting in more guesses, more information, but the permutations kind of get pretty wacky and pretty unuseful for a consumer. So we've found it's best to keep the guessing to a minimum and to the core fields, which essentially are the product and the vendor and the version. And those are the three core fields that we attempt to support. So.
Right. Cool. Awesome. Follow up on that. Again, I think I need to play with this a little bit more. But the metadata field that you have here, this is essentially you read it out of like the APK metadata file, right?
Exactly.
Cool.
So yeah, for each entry that we find, you'll find, say, if we're looking at a Python package, this metadata field looks completely different. You'll have different fields because a Python package is completely different. Same thing for RPM or Rust or Go, et cetera. So everything under metadata is tailored towards where we found it and the shape there.
Awesome. And another follow-up of that, just to like smoke test things a little bit. Now, do you verify that, for example, this claim of like UIDs and permissions and hash of the file actually hold in the host, or?
Oh yeah, good question. So here's what we do. So for instance, given this source, so notice that we have, say, for this Alpine package, libkeyutils. So we are looking at also individual files within. So we also go to the direct source and start cataloging all of the individual files as well. So if I were to look at, say, all the files, we have a bunch of stuff that we found. I think earlier I took a gander at, so I took a gander at this where, say, for all of our files, we're going to select the location where the path matches our specific libkey utils, which is part, supposedly owned by this package. And so we can have a specific digest here and all the specific metadata. Everything that you see here was what we actually found in the source, not a claim from the package manager. So you can take these two fields and cross correlate them to say, yes, nobody's messed with the package manager, or no, somebody has messed with it. It really is different. Something's wrong. So
cool. And a last thing, I'm sorry for all the questions, but this is really cool. I want to play with this, and I think I'll probably bring this in my course this semester, because I've been looking at SBOM tools, and I want the students to be able to understand the first class citizenry of SBOM tools in the software world. Something that I wanted to know is, I think the two files that you had in the example above, one of them is a symlink, just from like. So is that also captured, or?
Yes, we do capture symlinks. I don't think I have one handy, but the short of it is, what you would see is you would see type symlink for a particular path, if that path is like truly a symlink. And we won't have a digest for that per se, because it doesn't make sense to take a digest of a symlink. It makes sense to take a digest of, say, the actual real path.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much. And sorry for just jumping in, Michael.
So Jay, it's totally fine. I think your questions were really interesting. Alex, this is really cool stuff, and thank you for bringing this and showing this.
Oh yeah, I know.
So building on some of Santiago's questions, I wonder if there's value in sort of teasing apart the problems that this solves and other problems. Like this is always the challenge, right? You want something that's useful, but you also want something that is like going to get used for like the primary value proposition. And so here, I'm wondering if the matching of things to package identities and ultimately to CVEs is a separate process. Like the primary thing that they're doing here is essentially spelunking through an existing body of code. Somebody's produced an artifact and they didn't produce an SBOM in any kind of signed or unsigned way. So I want to know, tell me what's in this thing, and grovel as deep as you can. And I love the way you guys are spelunking through the many places to find the things. I wonder if there was the value in separating out from the list of things that you found to then start matching that to CPEs and CVEs and other things downstream as a separate part of the process, rather than a single sort of, I'm sort of the Unix tool, one thing, one do it well kind of thinker here.
Yeah, so great question. We have another tool, a separate tool called Gripe, and Gripe is a vulnerability scanner where I can, in very similar fashion, say, given some source, try to match all of the packages with known CVEs out in the world, and we can look at the original. We could look at the original image per se. You need all the image bytes, but we also allow input via SBOM. So you could say like, hey, I have right now this SIF JSON. And actually, I haven't run this against this. It's an Alpine image. The odds are there's not going to be a ton of vulnerabilities against it, but we'll see if there is any. And so you could use the SBOM itself as a way to do vulnerability matching. And if you have like a lot of images to go through, using the SBOM is way faster than looking at the images themselves.
No, that makes total sense. So, how are you resolving to the CPE? I guess is perhaps the question that I didn't ask more clearly. Like you do this analysis, find a bunch of things, and then somewhere along the way you resolve that back to a CPE. And I was curious as to what you're doing there and how.
Okay, so let me cat this guy back out just to have it kind of handy. So specifically, like, how are we generating these CPEs? Is
yeah,
what you're asking? Yeah. Okay. So I think for product name, so that there's two fields that are the hardest. And every ecosystem has a different answer. I'll mention right up front. We have vendor and you have product. And for the product field, it usually correlates pretty strongly to the name of the package that we found. And that's usually the easiest one to find. Vendor is not always easy and varies for many different things. For Java, you have completely different answers than if you're looking at Python, which you have completely different answers if you're looking at Go. And so we will have different guesses tailored for each ecosystem that we find it in. And so I would say like APK is a little more of a straightforward answer because we have like metadata down here that more directly ties to it. In fact, I think this is actually Actually, I think I just lied right there. APK is not a great example because we include the product name itself as a possible vendor. That is a very popular thing for people to do when they're writing CVEs, like, and they don't know what the right CVE is. So it's like, well, it's a product where the vendor is itself the same name as the product. So we'll try various flavors of that. We see dashes and underscores, and we'll cut off suffixes and whatnot. So
what I'm wondering is if separating those two pieces out would make sense, because you have like two somewhat heuristically driven things. Like one is like, okay, let me go find all the things, right? And then the other one's like, okay, now given those things, let me see if I can figure out what the hell they really are.
Yeah.
And with varying degrees of confidence. And I'm wondering if separating those things out so that, you know, where you're making these confidence decisions is separate, and somebody can kind of bring in their own resolver or their own tooling, or we can evolve these two things together. Like, I would love for us to start building on what you've done here.
Yeah.
Anyway, just a thought.
No, you're definitely on something in the sense that we've had a lot of internal conversations about just that. Like, does CPE generation really belong in SBOM generation, or does it belong downstream of that in processing?
Right.
And we landed on, we think for the meantime, it makes sense to have it in SBOM generation with the caveat for CPE specifically, which is we're not very authoritative to whether or not these CPEs are going to be correct, which kind of hints at, hey, maybe it should be downstream. However, imagine if you're doing vulnerability matching and you didn't find a particular match, and you're trying to ask the question, why didn't I get a match that I was expecting? One thing that you would really wish you had had at some input is to know what are all the things that you tried to match against. And the upside about having like a static SBOM document where you could have all the full set of CPEs for everything you're ever going to try to search for is that you can at least answer that question, like, this is the CPE that you tried. I see that the vendor's wrong, which is why you would have never found this. And that's the advantage that we essentially are leaning on here, knowing that we're also leaning on the caveat as well that like these are not authoritative; these are still guesses. And you're right, like it sniffs to stay downstream, but there is a very practical reason to keep it upstream here in like SBOM generation. So.
This is super cool. I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I'd love to follow up with you offline and see if we can lean in and help and start teasing apart these pieces, because I think that somebody else in case is just about component detection as a thing there too. So there's definitely an angle to play on here. So,
Cool.
I wanted to echo that. Sorry to jump in. I think this is something that would definitely be in the purview of a group like this to maybe help disambiguate between this like CPE world and Perl and all that.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely for like continuing that conversation for CPE generation, for crafting Perls, because CPE generation for certain ecosystems has been a very difficult thing. Like for Java, for instance, that can get, if you open up the code and look at CPE generation for Java, that one goes on for a while. there's some code there for that. So yeah, definitely open to having some conversations about that. So I did it like, specifically generation of IDs for packages. Yeah.
Well, and at some level, like what we're doing here, what you're doing here with this heuristic is sort of a band-aid. What we really want to do is to work our way upstream and start improving how the packages are formally identifying themselves so that we don't have to have this sort of guessing game, but we can start to do a better job. And I would be interested in how to think about that too.
That's true. And it comes down to this like fork in the road, as we've kind of chatted about it internally, which is, do we, even if we say improve the producer side, where your producers of software are generating these IDs and they're including it in their metadata for their packaging, we still have this consumer long tail where like for producers that do not do that, which is, today is the vast majority of the world, the consumers still need some solution in place in order to like act as a bit of a shim or shim tooling, I'll say, while the world is bootstrapping to say to include these IDs, like we still need, from a consumer point of view, to define these IDs or generate these IDs. Yeah, so there's definitely like room for both sides here, and like in a concurrent way. Like, and you're totally right. It'd be great to find a way to get consumers to kind of like software producers to do this more readily. So,
thank you.
Yeah, actually, to follow up on that, I was curious if you've been sort of talking with any of the SBOM sort of format engineers on some of these things, because I know that Cyclone DX has something in there regarding like what you can specify when it comes to like what you're claiming, or how you're claiming you identified the package. Like, are you claiming that you identified the package because it was part of a build and I'm, as part of the compiler or whatever, I'm making a claim, or am I claiming that it is through a heuristic model or something like that? I was wondering, like, have you looked at any of that? Have you seen, have you had any issues with that sort of approach? Because I know as a consumer of these things, one of the big things that I want to just be able to tell is if I get an SBOM that's, let's say, generated by something like SIFT, what claim is it making? Is it asking me, is it telling me that, yes, I am 99% sure this package is this, or is it telling me that, hey, I did a grep and, looked through some names and that's how I'm specifying it, or I looked at a package of, looked at a database of hashes. I want to have a better understanding of how the package was actually identified.
Gotcha. So I will say that, so most of what I showed off today was just the kind of the SIFT JSON, and so everything that is, like I say, above metadata has been normalized, where we're saying, yeah, we pulled out from raw information, and everything below is the raw information itself. It's essentially unprocessed. When we take this information, this SIFT model, and map it into something like Cyclone DX and to SPDX, we are continually trying to find better ways to fit into those formats. And so right now we're in a bit of a push right now on SPDX to enable both encoding and decoding. So in the near future, we'll be adding, say, a convert command where, given an SPDX document, I can convert to, say, a Cyclone DX document. And part of that is what you're, and part of doing that kind of work is fully understanding what each spec can express, and which has been definitely a bit of a challenge. So I guess to answer your question more directly, for Cyclone DX, I'm less aware of such features. For SPDX is where we've been working the last several weeks. I'm a little more aware, like for licensing, they have that same like license declared versus license concluded. So you can make those such discrepancies or distinctions, I'll say. But yeah, I haven't looked into it for Cyclone DX yet as much. So we are not leveraging that part of the spec yet. So
Alex, to build on this theme, I think I love Michael's question, like understanding what is claim, what is fact, where it came from, and separating the utility of generating a particular format output with what it can do versus what truths you're able to discover is going to help us all lean in to figure out where we can make it better, help, build on it. So really interesting conversation.
Yeah, and just one like quick tinfoil hat sort of thing here is right, like I know in previous sorts of things like this, right, is if somebody just sort of names a package the same as some sort of upstream, they copy the metadata over, it could, depending on how you're sort of expressing that, it could cause confusion, and somebody thinks like, oh yeah, this is actually the package, where it turns out it was, some malicious actor had just sort of more or less copied the metadata from another package, put whatever they wanted in there. And, and so if you were saying, hey, this is, I'm just, looking at this metadata and this is how I'm doing that, then I know, okay, I might need to, for certain cases, have a deeper level introspection and helping, sort of figure that out. I think it's going to be important.
Yeah. Okay. So not tinfoil at all. To be very clear, like I don't think it's tinfoil at all. I think it's very important. So, and I think to answer that more directly, more about what between like the truth of a thing and the claim of a thing. So everything that we find under artifacts is essentially what we discovered from packaging metadata or from what the binary tells us, which is all essentially what something is declared. However, everything that we have underneath files is what we're verifying to be. This is the actual metadata on disk. This is the actual digests, et cetera. So you would hope that there is, depending on the ecosystem, that there is some connective tissue between these two things. There's a claim of an artifact saying, hey, I own these 13 files, and you'd hope to find those 13 files in existence and to match with what's claimed up in artifacts. And that's about as far as we go today. But we don't have anything beyond that does any verification of that. And so that's something that we want to like start looking for the future. But we've been more focused on like the actual generation of the SBOM, like raising the raw data first before we go into say like, what are the strict ways that we can go and start verifying these things? Cool. Oh man, there's still like lots of hands raised.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess
David, I think was next.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. I put in the chat here, but you know, the challenges of CPEs. You know, most projects don't have CPEs. For the OpenSSF best practices badge, we're using the repo URLs and the homepage URLs to help identify projects, because that actually generalizes across the world. I have been trying to make some attempts and some whines at the National Vulnerability Database to try to add that kind of information for identification. They have for years kept claiming they're going to switch to SWIDs,
yeah.
which is completely laughable. We all know that won't work. I don't know why I know why they keep saying it. They keep saying SWIDs because it's an ISO spec. The fact that it's not a useful ISO spec for their purpose apparently is not important. I say somewhat jokingly here, but you know, I understand they want to identify things, they want to use ISO standards, but you got to use the right ones, not just because it's got a label. So I'm hoping that the NVD will add things, you know, homepage URLs, repo URLs, Pearls might be an option, but you know, something, you know, you know, right now CPEs are the one true way, and I'd love to see alternatives, but they have to be useful alternatives.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I saw the software ID proposal that went in, and it made my heart skip a beat. So,
I'm sorry, which proposal made your heart skip a beat?
Oh, the SWID, the one you're talking about, like using
right
for IDs and NVD. So,
yeah, it works as long as no one has compilers. Oh wait, people have compilers. Oh, they might recompile code. Well, oh great. So you know, and you know, or make very minor change, even if they're reproducible. Very minor change makes the SWIDs useless. So yeah. we've got to move beyond SWIDs being the one true way, because that it doesn't work.
Yeah, and Perl we have found to be most generically useful. We have found use cases where Perl still doesn't like quite fit the bill, but it's not like it needs to in the situations. Like say for vulnerability matching, like knowing the identity of a package is good, but knowing that it's based off of an upstream source package is even better for matching, because you can that link is helpful for knowing if you actually may have a vulnerability in something that it wasn't that the CVE doesn't actually specifically say, or maybe like inversely, so like, you know, the CVE is written against like that umbrella project, the upstream thing, but not against the 70 different builds that, you know, it just doesn't know about. So
yeah. Well, in particular, I mean, I put in a comment, you know, I only have so much time, but I put in a comment, Perl would be way more helpful if it could support version ranges, but it doesn't today, which is the main reason why CPEs keep getting used, because it has a nice, simple version range mechanism. And without that, a lot of these other systems don't work very well. SWIDs don't work at all because they're hashes of particular versions, and that's not, that means you can't identify anything else.
I know there have been discussions in the SPDX community about some additional changes, enhancements that are wanted for Perl, and there have been discussions about working together with the maintainers of Perl to see if we can't make some extensions. Do we, David, I put a note in the chat. Do we do have a couple of other items on the agenda. Do we want to, how do we want to, and I know we've got more questions on this. Do we want to time bound? How do we, or just continue and
Yeah, you know, this is actually a good reminder because you know, I'm really excited, want to talk about these things, but you're right, we did have one more agenda item. Maybe we can I mean, it's actually you. So do you think you could which is why you're probably asking. Yeah. Do you think we could have like 2 more minutes and give you 20? Would that be adequate?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try to wind it in 2 more minutes and I'll shut up.
Yeah.
So Michael, Hank, Moshe,
Which one?
Hank now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone was in front of me in line. Hi, everybody.
Quickly.
I think I've never joined this before. Quickly. Yeah. So SWIT is not laughable. SWIT is scope specific. So
Fair enough.
That's a very, very precise comment. It's very useful in a different scope.
Right. That's right. It was designed for purpose A. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So dismissing NVD and SWIT will get you in hot and deep water where you'll never come out of. So maybe that might be a very, very unwise strategy. I would like to add that.
All right. Well, I guess any other questions?
Moshe, real quick.
Really quick comments. One is that another thing I would love to talk about maybe next time on CPE gaps is inheritance, which you cannot deduce inheritance within CPEs. I know that other identification schemes are not supporting inheritance as well, but I think in terms of dependencies, that's a really big issue. And second, there is one project that I'm following, but it's very latent from NIST, is the SCAP, SCAP project. It tries to tie in all different, like I think it has like 15 or 16 different schemes together. I think it's too much of a mega project, but maybe I'm missing something.
Okay. Yeah, so I propose let's give Kay her 20 minutes.
Thanks, Moshe, for the floor. Appreciate it.
Sorry, it was all good though.
Oh,
Kay,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David, and thanks, Alex. This was and Josh, great project and great discussion. So what I wanted to discuss is using this working group or a subgroup of this working group to work through our, sort of common approach or strategy for supply chain artifact signing. And some context for this, so I'll describe what's been happening at Microsoft. Maybe other companies are going through the same thing. But we and some of the industry partners that we have that we've been working with have been contemplating approaches to signing artifacts, including SBOMs, containers, digital media metadata. And by digital media, I'm talking about imaging and photos and that kind of thing, IoT artifacts, et cetera. And so we've been going through a process where we're evaluating a number of different standards and existing signing approaches. And we would like to sync with this working group to see if this is something that we can work through this process together with everyone so that we can come up on a common strategy. So the goal that we have is, spoken from the user perspective, is that supply chain participants across the industry can validate the authenticity and integrity of digital artifacts. By digital artifacts, we're looking at we think of this broadly. So it could be code, packages, containers, any type of supply chain attestation, including SBOMs. There are a number of other in the executive order. There are a number of other attestations and evidence of conformance that will be required for supply chain artifacts. And then also for policy statements for supply chain artifacts, or for what artifacts people will accept. So we're thinking about, broadly all of those types of artifacts. And then in this document, oh, am I sharing?
Not yet, but
Sorry, let me
fix
screen
that.
share because I'm I'm talking from a document and it might help you all see it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is just, these are the notes that I put into the meeting agenda. That's what I'm talking to. So I said that, what we want to do is allow people to validate the authenticity and integrity. And then I just defined them. Authenticity is, was the artifact provided by the expected entity, whoever the expected entity is, and was the artifact altered between the time it was provided and the time it was received. So the issue that we're seeing, or that we would like to try to solve, is that there's I called it a multiplicity of signing formats, and having all of the many existing and new forthcoming signing formats, it impedes the validation, makes it harder to validate the artifacts that are received. So what I would like for this working group, or a subset of this working group, to do is to develop recommendations for facilitating the authenticity, verifying the authenticity of and integrity of artifacts. Solutions might include one or more of the following. I'm not trying to say what solutions we'll come up with, but some logical ones might be agreeing on a standard format that we use for signing digital artifacts, and or creating tooling to assist with the signing and validation of artifacts across a variety of formats. So, what would the next steps be? So if we decide to establish a subgroup to discuss this, well, we want to, create that subgroup, task the subgroup with creating a proposal that outlines the requirements and the alternatives, and, discusses and proposes an overall strategy. And then bring that back to this full working group for discussion. So that's the background that I have for this, and then I'd like to open up and see what folks think. I don't want us to get into today discussing the relative merits of different signing approaches. I think that those are topics that we want to leave to this subgroup. For today, we just, excuse me, just want to, agree, is this a problem space that we think is relevant for this working group? And, how do we want to approach it? Do we want to create a subgroup and go forward from there? Go ahead, David.
Okay, actually, Santiago was first.
Oh,
so
okay.
Go ahead, Santiago.
Yeah, that's me. So I had a comment, not on the merit, but rather my understanding is that in the agenda there was something about like reviewing the README and kind of picking up on where are we at with things with name change and what are we doing here. I wonder if that can set the tone of the conversation as to why is this a challenge in the supply chain space.
What is that again, Santiago? Reviewing what?
That's the earlier agenda item, the first agenda item, updating the working group README.
Right.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And in that sense, that kind of set up the we were used to do digital identity. Now we're going to be doing supply chain integrity. What are the implications? I actually found myself reading the README earlier today, and it's funny because there's a section on these are related efforts that we should look about, and it was talking about GPG key servers and DCD, DID, and stuff like that. That I was like, oh well, that's perfectly relevant to the old group. But I wonder if we can try to find synchrony between that and this sort of effort. I think it'd be easier to walk in and say, hey, we looked at this efforts. There's all of these tools. They're insufficient, or people are getting lost between the signal and the noise. So we're going to set forth a recommendation of what's the reference usage of supply chain integrity tools and signing mechanisms and so on and so forth. Or we find out that there's projects already within OpenSSF that may be fitting some of the bill, and we need to extend it somehow, right? I don't know, what do you think?
My preference would be to do both at the same time. So we do need to update the README, and we do want to have a look at existing projects and think about the roadmap for existing projects and where we want to go. But we do, in addition to that, we do have a kind of a window of opportunity now to talk about signing formats. And the reason I suggest that it's a window of opportunity is that very shortly, because of the executive order, a number of organizations will be producing evidence of conformance demonstration, including things like software bills of materials, and they'll want to be signing those. So this is our case at Microsoft. We have an internal goal to be signing all of our SBOMs, and we'd like to do that by March. So we really would like to, have this discussion about signing formats for supply chain artifacts, at the same time as we're working on the README. Does that make sense, Santiago?
It does to me, but I also kind of wonder the open source angle. For example, there's 4 or 5 rebuilders for Edge Linux already that are producing evidence for builds, and they're using within the reproducible builds project. They're also being deployed for Debian, and I think for good or bad, the open source ecosystem will move a little bit differently from say Microsoft taking a stance in whatever format they decide to choose.
Yeah, so we want, again, all I'm really doing is suggesting that we create a working group to talk through those issues. So we create a sub-working group to talk through those issues. So that's a good point. And I'd like to discuss that. I just would like to.
Sure. Yeah, no, I wanted to bring that forward. I know that it's a fine line to walk between, hey, this is the merits of the actual thing, or let's discuss whether to have the conversation. And I think the conversation is important. I just wanted to put that a little bit forward.
Okay. Michael Lieberman.
So yeah, I'd be interested in better sort of understanding what the current sort of problem is with some of this sort of stuff, because I do know of a couple of different sort of open source tools and formats that are starting to evolve, or even sort of old school existing things that people have done using GPG to sign stuff. I'd be just sort of curious to understand what some of the concern is. Is there an issue here that there's just so many formats, and that that it's going to end up causing? I just don't know what is the what's the real issue we're trying to solve.
Yeah, so I think the real issue is just to make it easy to exchange artifacts, and part of making it easy is using a common format. So just imagine that we are getting everyone, and this is just a simple example, we're getting everyone providing software bills of materials. It makes it easier to exchange and to trust those if we're all using a common signing format. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I think so.
Okay. Hank?
Yeah, hi again. I hope my thingy works. I don't actually know.
It's working.
Okay, yeah, because I can still see you and typically it changes. So the thing is that the time window. I think the time window is the hard requirement here. And to iterate a mantra from some STOs, to parallelize and not serialize here. And so I think if we're going to do a subgroup here, and that sounds to be a quite good start, we should parallelize by not starting with a blank page and aggregating requirements. We should bring requirements to the table. We should bring a problem statement, as I just heard, a precise problem statement to the table that we can start with, and then also a proposal. And from there, we can bash and iterate fast. If we're starting with a blank page, it will take longer. And again, the window is like, I think 3 months. So in computing scientists, time takes, this is 2 eternities, and 2 eternities go very, very fast. So I'd say that to bring content into the subgroups, don't start with an open discussion, but with proposals, with problem statements, and then with concerns. Bashing those is to me a very, very quick, maybe expedited procedure.
Yeah, that makes sense, Hank. We do have, we've been working through this internally at Microsoft, and we'd be happy to share the problem statement and the alternatives that we've been looking at. But I don't, I don't want anyone to come away from this feeling like Microsoft is trying to drive a decision and do it, exactly in our way. What we'd want to do is just bring forward, here's the way we've been thinking about it, and but we would want to hear from others and see other proposals and consider changing our thinking. Michael?
So thanks for bringing this, Kay. Lots of conversations obviously we've had in the past around this. I think to some of the sort of macro questions that I've heard coming up in response to this, my goal is actually kind of like, at the end of the day, the government is coming. They want us to have solutions. And I would much rather that this group of people, who I consider to be pretty much the most engaged and expert in this space, be able to not just have a bunch of ideas and thoughts and opinions, but actually be an authoritative voice to the government, where we can start to say, look, we're not going to be ready tomorrow, but we're going to be on this journey here, and we're the best place to be the answer to that journey, rather than some random standards body spewing out some, standards track thing that doesn't make sense, but sounds imposed on all of us, and we all end up scrambling around trying to make it work for real, or ignoring it, end up in a really bad place. So my macro goal is that this working group actually becomes, in many ways, authoritative and on that journey. I don't think we can be over there overnight. I think individual organizations and open source communities will evolve in a variety of different ways, but we want the conversation and sort of our point of view going back to the government, because the government has a nasty way of just deciding things without caring. We want it to be coming through us and them leaning on us, right? And representing correctly that this is a bunch of people who are academia, research, practitioners, industry, all playing together to do this right. I will lower my hand. Okay.
Thanks, Michael. So I guess what I'd say, we're kind of coming up on the end of time. Unless there are strong concerns, that we should not create a subgroup, I'd like to go ahead and do that. And I can take the next step, which is to, which I believe would be to, send out we'll figure out how to, create a subgroup and get a mailing list and things for that. I can talk with the folks at the Linux Foundation about that. And then, send that information out to this mailing list. And we can pick a date where, or a meeting series where the people who are interested in it can begin participating. So,
yeah, I agree with you. I don't hear any negatives on the general idea. I would say, and I've written it down here, I think one of the first steps, and I think you already have some of this, is quick summary and links to existing materials. I think consistent with what Michael and Santiago has said, making clear what the problem is. And I think we ought to try to make it clear how existing projects like SigStore connect.
mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that has to be a single format, but something that we can all work with, I think, is the real goal.
Right.
So if it's everybody has to read these 3 formats, but they're all common and we all understand them. But something we can do. I think in the end, solve problem is what we're looking for.
Right. Yep. I agree.
Well, state problem, agree on statement of problem, solve problem, agree on solution.
Yes.
You know, it's, I believe there's a step 5, profit, right? It's all going to work out really well.
or at least stop spending money on problems that you didn't really need to solve.
Oh no, we're software engineers. I think that's completely out of scope, David. Nice try though.
I should reclarify. Make the problem easier to solve so we can spend our cycles on something else.
Now we're talking.
Okay. I
All
did
right.
have one last agenda item, which is I've heard from a few people that that this time frame, every other Wednesday or Wednesdays at 9 o'clock, does not work for some of the new people who are starting to attend these meetings. And so I wonder if we can, you know, again, given the increase in scope and the new attendees, consider moving to a different time. And so I'd be happy to help with this as well. So I can, you know, do a quick scan of the OpenSSF calendar to see what other times are available that don't conflict with existing OpenSSF meetings, and then send a poll to the mailing list. Is that okay with folks? Any concerns?
It's fine by me. Although I suspect you will find there is no perfect time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's see. And you know, one of the options will certainly be keep the current time. So, and then we can look at some others.
Would you please coordinate that first with Kim, at least to make sure that we don't try to pick a
Yep.
time she can't do?
Yep, I'll do that.
Awesome. All right. We're at time. So anybody have any quick parting shots? Otherwise, we're done.
Happy New Year.
Yay. Happy New Year, everybody. Excellent parting
Yes.
shot. Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you,
So fun to
everybody.
see you all again. Yeah.
Yes. So
Take
thank you,
care.
everybody. I think we're done. Good night or good
Okay.
afternoon.
Thank you. Great discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kay. And thank you for reminding me. I got so excited about our time.
Thank you for leading.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Okay, bye.